say hello to all of the folks that have signed in. I'm really thrilled to see some people that we haven't had on our Zoom presentations before. So it's gratifying. Hopefully our social media is starting to get a little traction on Facebook, Instagram. We are trying to post and let people know about the speakers. So welcome to all of the first time participants here.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. So actually, I'm Camille Gregorian. Martha, what am I, the vice president or something?
Yes, you're the vice chair. Yes, you are.
I said to Martha, I'd like to help, and I don't know, somehow I'm the vice. And Martha Jamgochin is our president and actually is the heart and soul of Ahari. She does so much. All right, I think I'm gonna start with the introduction. We can always let people in if we have some stragglers. So again, welcome everybody. We're happy to have you here. And it's my pleasure to introduce our presenter today. It's Carel Bertram. He is a professor, Carel, Amarada, Department of Humanities, faculty in Middle East and Islamic Studies at San Francisco State University. Her first book was Imagining the Turkish House, Collective Visions of Home, which was published in 2008. We heard about Carel and her book from Hegna Wattenpaw, who we had a couple of months ago. Dr. Wattenpaw is the author of The Missing Pages, The Modern Life of a Medieval Manuscript. She describes Carel's work as original and engrossing, relating individual experiences that resonate with universal themes of family, trauma, and home. Carel's gifts of empathy and storytelling make a book that is at once heartbreaking and inspiring. And I think it's safe to say that everybody here tonight has a deep connection to their ancestral homeland in Armenia, in historic Armenia, and that we're all looking forward to Carel's talk. So welcome, Carel, and take it away.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I am so glad to be here, and I'm so glad that all of you are here. And I definitely would like to thank the Armenian Historical Association of Rhode Island. And I'd also like to thank Martha Jamgochin and Camille Gregorian, who organized inviting me and has put this all together for all of us. I'm thrilled and actually moved to be able to talk to you today about my book, which I just happen to have here. Can I read that? It's called A House in the Homeland, Armenian Pilgrimages to Places of Ancestral Memory. And it is the story of what I saw, what I deeply saw, and what I came to understand when I traveled with small groups of Armenians, mostly from the United States, but not all, to what is today modern Turkey. And these were groups of Armenians who were traveling with a very special mission. They all wanted to go back to their ancestral towns, cities, and villages. And they had an even more precise desire, and that was, if possible, if only possible, to find their ancestral house. So their stories and their experiences and the way that I interpret them is what makes up my book. And that's what I am going to share with you today. Not everything that I am sharing today is in my book because I had so much to say and so many people are behind some of the conclusions that I came to. So some of the details that you get today are unpublished extras, but mostly I am telling you about the experiences that I also have in my book. So all of them combined to help each other. I'm going to start a PowerPoint now, which Camille helped me understand. Now, where is that little thing at the top? Oh,
Yeah, go all the way up to the top where it says home, and then move over to the right, and you'll see, there you go.
there we go. The thing gets covered by something else, but there we are. So now you get to see the cover of my book. So I want to just reiterate that this book comes from traveling with families whose parents and grandparents were survivors of the Armenian genocide of 1915. And that means they were people that actually knew, as their parents and grandparents, the people whose houses they were visiting. So they are a very special generation with a very special attachment. And I also want to say that I was taken over and over again with their courage, because they were going back to a place that reverberated with many brutal stories. So the towns that they were hunting for were filled with a lot of sadness. But what I saw, and I think that I'm able to show you, what they really wanted and what they found was the love and the warmth that their families had remembered and had lost. But before I get to the hometowns, I just want to say that depending on their itineraries, and all the groups went to areas that were close to their hometowns, depending on their itineraries, pilgrims would go to at least some of the icons of Armenian heritage. Now let's see if it'll go forward. There we go. That work? Yeah. So for example, they would go to the medieval Armenian capital of Ani, and they went to Akhtamar, and they went to the holy Mount Ararat in eastern Turkey. And I'm saying that because these were extremely important to them, and they were also very emotionally attached to these places. But these were not the goals of these particular pilgrimages. So even though they were extremely powerful experiences, it became clear to me that if they had seen Akhtamar, but not their town of Malatya, or the city of Sepastia, Sivas, or the smaller town of Arapgir, or the village of Gurun, if they hadn't seen those towns, they wouldn't feel as if they had returned home. Because once they were there, if they could find the village, and if they could find the house, and even if they couldn't find the house, but they found where it had been, they would begin to feel that they had heard their homeland's beating heart. So today I want to tell you about that search for that house in the homeland, and how that made them into true pilgrims, and how that house offered them a pilgrim's reward. The cover of my book is this wonderful painting of the town of Yozgat. It was made from memory in 1911 by the great uncle of one of the pilgrims, Marianne Kazanjian. Marianne and her husband were on one of the many pilgrimages I made between 2007 and 2015. and Marianne had brought a copy of her Uncle Vahan's painting along with her. She was kind of hoping that it would work as a map to help her find the house, but it didn't. Actually, only Armin Aroyan could help her find it. The trips that I went on were led by Armin Aroyan from Glendale, California, and only an intrepid few travelers could ever have found their villages without him. Armin knew how to get them where they wanted to go, and he also had the generosity of spirit to do the work. Armin was their Sherlock Holmes and their Marco Polo, and I am ever grateful to his welcome to me. Over the course of my travels, I met over 100 pilgrims, and I feel so lucky for that opportunity. Some of you are in the audience right now. But I also added another 300 voices to my study by reading what had been written about their trips in blogs or memoirs or in books. And this included many articles that pilgrims had written for Armin Aroyan, who hopefully will be able to publish his collection, or also from some of the videos that he had taken. He took videos of most of his hundreds of trips, but and shared some of them with me. I didn't go through all of them. And here he is taking a video. Some of the voices in my book actually predate the Armin Aroyan phenomenon, because that began just before the 1990s. So I was able to read some things from what I call native pilgrims, meaning people who were born in historical Armenia and began to make some cautious returns starting in the early 1950s. But most of my book is about the second group, whom I know more intimately, and I call them descended pilgrims. As I've said, the children and grandchildren of the survivors who came to the diaspora. Natives made real returns, but descendants, whom I talk about today, traveled to places they had never been to before. Still, they called their trips returns because they had a real sense of homecoming, as we shall see. This is my rendition of where they traveled to. I couldn't put all of the places on the map. I'm going to try to, just working a little better for me, sorry. I couldn't get them all on the map, but I got as many as I could. And this is in the front of the book so that the readers can have some kind of a guide. And I guess that my guess is that most of you know these places, know of these places, or have traveled to some of them. I asked the poet Gregory Janikian to use an excerpt from one of his poems on it, because I felt like it was almost a short version of my book. So I'll read that to you. And I can tell you that the dream I have is to walk back to this village and stand in the square for a moment, feeling the history of it on my skin, a history of departures, vanishings. From the beginning of their trip to the time they found and then left their own village, each pilgrim, and I think bar none, was in an emotional state ranging from restless suspense to high anxiety. Clearly, each pilgrim expected something to happen, and it just about always did. And this was true, as I'll say many times, even if they didn't find their houses, because even the place where their house once stood could explode with its stories. This is Sita on my very first trip, looking for her family house in Malatya. She is one example of how when pilgrims reached their towns or villages, assuming there was anything left there, they scanned the landscape, hoping that their house might appear. Mostly they didn't know which one it might be, but there was a hope that if they took enough pictures, maybe it would be caught on their camera. And if they scanned the horizon piercingly enough, they might be able to say they had seen their house. Sita had more clues than most people. She had brought a drawing of her house that had been made by a relative from memory, just as my book cover had been. But she never was able to find it or really identify it. Sona, another pilgrim, found that the Armenian neighborhood in Kirshahir had been totally razed. There was really nothing to take a picture of. Her grandmother had described Kirshahir as a beautiful village, though it was hard to believe it now. And it seems that there was a gas station in the place where her house might have been. But she knew that she would never find her house, even though it had been very large. Her grandfather and his brothers and all their wives and children had lived in it. But one day, in 1915, there had been a knock on the door and all the adult men had been taken away, never to be seen again. Sadly, this was a story most pilgrims could relate to. I heard this story over and over again on the bus. Zavin would cover his ears. He couldn't take it anymore. Sona said, "My grandfather was the one who opened the door. As he left, he said to my grandmother, 'Take care of the girls.'" The family tried to figure out what to do. How could they live now? How could they live in Kirshahir? But all of a sudden, the answer came. Their house was burnt to the ground and they fled. This was why Sona knew she would never find her house. After Sona saw where her house must have been, she returned to the bus alone. The other pilgrims were still out exploring, but now she looked happy for the first time and somehow at peace, but also exhausted. I had already asked her, "What do you expect to find in Kirshahir?" "Nothing," she had said. "I just wanted to be there." Anushavan of Watertown went to the village of Keri, and here it is on my map, but this is what he saw as he was driving or being driven into town. Like Sona, he probably did, or he certainly didn't find the house. Sona certainly did. Anushavan might have. But his house was still able to give its blessings. Technically, Anushavan is a native pilgrim, as he had been born in Keri, but he had escaped with his mother and his aunt when he was 2. He was about 80 when he returned, accompanied by his son, Stephen. Nonetheless, when he got off the bus, he literally ran into the village, and then he suddenly stopped and he said, "My house was right here. It's fallen down." I have this on one of Armin's videos, and that's why the shots that you're seeing are a bit blurry. I never met Anushavan, but I talked and corresponded with his son, Stephen Kirkjian, who had written his story. And that gave me even more background to watch the video and to understand what has happened. Stephen ran to keep up with his father, and pretty soon a lot of villagers came around and tried to help him find where his house had been. And he tried to make that decision. He was certain that the house had been near a stream where his family had kept their yogurt cool. Finally, when he was in a place that he thought was the place of the lost house, he took out a speech that he had prepared to give to his father, because that was the last place he had seen him. He knew that this house had a connection to the transcendent. In fact, he knew he was standing on holy ground. He began his speech like this. "My father," he began, and then he was overcome with emotion. After a pause, he continued, looking at his text for prompts. "I've come here with my son to pay my respects to you." He stopped again, and he was weeping. "And I'm going to name all in the family that know you from my description." And then he read all the names, ending with his son. "My son, Stephen, who is named after you." And then Anushavan pointed to Stephen to make sure that his father saw him. And this just made me sit up and take notice, as it told me that Anushavan felt that his father really was present. I was also taken by how he had invoked his father's presence using the words, "my father," and then looking up. This associated him with the divine through the Lord's Prayer. Significantly, Anushavan had chosen to separate this sacred space from the profane. His invocation did not mention what he knew about his father's death, but you can imagine. Here he is afterward, walking around. You can see the speech held in his hand, and he's being accompanied by Jamal, who was our Kurdish driver and also Armin's helper. Who even knew that he wanted to go to Kegi? But on a family vacation, sitting in the sun, his daughter had said, "Isn't this place heaven? Is there anywhere else in the world you would rather be?" She thought she was asking a rhetorical question, but her father took it seriously, very seriously. "Yes," he said, "the village where I was born." Stephen took him there the following year. And now on to Husinig. Here it is on the map. And here is a view looking down from the Harpert Fortress. And I want to thank co-pilgrim Charles Jamgochian, who took many pictures on this trip, has shared them with me, one of which I have in my book. So I'm very lucky. Barbara from Worcester, Massachusetts, was one of the lucky ones who found her house and found it intact. I don't think this is the right one. I don't have her house, but it looks just like it, and it's in Husinig, so this is a proxy. Husinig Sea pilgrims were lucky, as they could use the Gulcaisian Portoyan map of Husinig. On it, they could search for their families' neighborhoods, landmarks, and sometimes even plots. So Barbara took this with her, and the locals helped show her how to find her house. And I think all of the local Husinig people were following her as well. Barbara's maternal grandmother's house was in the Rustigian neighborhood, which you see there. She didn't know what to expect when she got there, but she certainly didn't expect the warm welcome that its owners gave to her. They took her into the house, She's looking back at us here in amazement that she's found it, and she's about to go in. And then from the video, I have her cousins going upstairs and a little bit into the main room of the house. But they soon returned downstairs to the garden and to where all of the other traveling pilgrims were. And there she was given a glass of tan, the yogurt drink that in Turkey is called ayran. This was a drink she knew from her home in Massachusetts. And so it seemed both natural and really magical at the same time. She took a sip and then she stopped and she thought for a moment, and then she raised her glass and she cried out with a sense of joy and astonishment, "I'm drinking tan from my house." Barbara even surprised herself by suddenly recalling some of her family's Turkish. When her hostess invited them all into the garden, Barbara recognized the word for garden. Bahçe, bahçe, she burst out. Barbara had already heard about the garden's mulberry trees and also about the house with the low roof where the family slept in summer, including tales of children who had sometimes fallen off of it. It made her hug the children in the garden. Something felt very alive to her. But this aliveness was especially poignant because not everything was alive, of course. Barbara had looked for and found that the village church monastery, Srp Varvar, had been fully destroyed following 1915. They dynamited it because they wanted it to disappear, she told me. This too is part of the house's story. The church had been famous for its healing prayers for eyes, and her grandmother, whose house she had found, had spent time there as a child so they could cure her vision, which was being lost due to smallpox. Barbara herself was named for Srp Varvar. Perhaps she had inherited its healing proclivities, if not its powers, for something inside her decided to set for now aside what she knew about why and how her grandmother had left this house, though taking with her her love for it. Instead, she gathered her cousins that she was traveling with and the new owners of the house for a family photo. And this is another proxy. I don't have the photo, but this is a local family at the same time in Hussenig. All of her memories would reassemble in her own story of her own house. For now, she had become a part of it. And now I'm going on to Liege. Zaven from Providence traveled to Liege, one of the many villages associated with De Kronegert or Diyarbakir. He went on 8 pilgrimages with Armin to search for his lost house in Liege's upper village. The first trip was in 1993, a time of armed Kurdish resistance to state repression. And since Liege is a Kurdish village, it was also in a type of war zone and dangerous to enter. So Armin and Jamal rushed them in and rushed them out. The following year, 1994, Zaven took his Aunt Alice, who had been born in that house, and her daughter, Lucille. But the war had escalated and they didn't get into Liege at all. But at their hotel, they met a Liege man who was related to Alice's husband's side of the family. And he sang a Liege song that Alice recognized, and tears ran down her face. That year, Zaven also took along his daughter Nicole and her mother Charlotte. They later would go to Gurun, Nicole holding her grandmother's hand-drawn map. Zaven longed to see the huge story Vartanian mansion where his mother and her siblings had been raised. But in 1975, there had been a major earthquake and this whole upper village was gone. Zaven began to figure all of this out when he finally did get into Liege and meet people, and I think that was in 2007. In 2009, when I was with him for the first time, he brought his cousin Sylvia, whose mother was also from the Liege house. Even though that area had been flattened by the earthquake, he could still go and stand where it had been and look at its beautiful view. This is from his return in 2012, when he brought his daughter Lisa. He could locate it because, as he told me, my mother said that the house was in the crook of the mountain. It had 3 levels, animals on the ground floor, family on the first floor, kids and other family members on the 3rd floor. And Sylvia had added, Duna is what my father called it. Grandfather Vartan had been a traveling camel merchant and probably the richest man in Liege, and his house produced a lot of family. Zafen had often heard the story that about every 10 months, when grandfather returned from his camel selling, grandmother would become pregnant. Stands to reason. After the genocide, the family that had survived, including the Liege sons-in-law, regrouped in America, but not all in the same house. Still, they often traveled to be together on Sundays, whether in Rhode Island, New Jersey, or New York, where they cooked, ate, sang, and talked. And so the 3-storied house that didn't exist was still creating stories. In America, Zaven's mother became famous for her churek, her midyadolma, and her kufta with its distinct shape. They were flat on the bottom and round on the top, Zaven told me. If you see ones that are entirely round, the cook has started to use a scoop, which is not the same. He had watched Liege being performed in the kitchen many times. His mother would start by making the ground meat into a ball, poke a hole partway through it, put in the filling, close the opening, and then she would hold it on the flat of her hand and to keep the bottom flat, and then round the top, shaping them all perfectly. In fact, what seemed to amaze Zaven, because he told me this often, was that if you weighed them, they were all exactly the same. It was hard to know how his mother had learned to make these delicacies. She certainly didn't learn them from her own mother, who, as Vartanian, the camel merchant's wife, was queen of the mansion. She had servants. She was a hatun. All these memories were tied to Liege, to the house near the crook in the mountain. Sylvia's mother kept Liege alive too, with her subarek, a casserole-type savory pie made with flat noodles, butter, and white cheeses that you probably know and have made or have tasted. Her father was famous for his raki. Zaven's father and Sylvia's father, who had married 2 sisters of the Liege house, would sing local songs together, or sometimes they would sing them one after another. Zaven's father would sing in Turkish and Sylvia's father would sing in Kurdish. But Sylvia's father was the one whose specialty was a Kurdish tune and dance, and he had taught that to everyone. So on the night before they arrived in Liege, Zaven taught his friend, the clarinetist Hachig Kazarian, to play Sylvia's father's tunes and surprise her when she arrived. Can you imagine how Sylvia felt when she heard those songs there? Rhode Island was blowing life into Lige. She was moved to dance. Zavin was moved to tears. And so the Lige house took on the aura of Sundays at home in Rhode Island, where, as Zavin would say, they ate good food, they sang old songs, and they told sad stories. Zavin knew at least some of these sad stories. His father had watched his family die, all except his little sister, who was left to a Kurdish family. He himself was taken into work for another Kurdish family. Eventually, he escaped, finally to the United States, and later was able to send for his surviving family who had escaped to Syria. In 1951, he traveled to Syria with his wife with the hope of getting into Lige and finding news about his sister. But they were not allowed to cross into it. They could yell across the guards to people they had arranged to meet them. And it was they who told them that his sister had been abandoned and died. Zavin sighed, telling this story. And then he said, and right after that, my father developed a heart condition, and within 2 years, he died. And my mother always said, it wasn't a medical thing. He died of a broken heart because he couldn't find his sister. Zavin was about 15. It was the end of the Lige house partying it up in New England. Still, the house went on telling its stories and tying its family to their homeland, and it kept calling Zavin back. Not long before Armin retired, Zavin finally decided he would take no more trips. He told me, one reason I don't want to go again is the plane ride. I'm fine with the plane ride going there. I hate the plane going home because it's all over. When these pilgrims went to their homeland, they found few Armenians, and most of their houses, churches, schools, and monasteries had been destroyed. So they were thrilled when they thought they saw one sign of Armenianness on this license plate that they saw in Gurun, and they went rather crazy. The owner of the parked truck could not figure out why this crazy group of tourists was photographing it, but you probably do, as Hai means Armenian. All of the travelers, if they did find their houses, or if they found the places where they might have been, they found that their pilgrim's quest was given some satisfaction. Certainly, they received some repair to the vast emptiness caused by being displaced from their own histories. The house seemed to have this power, even with its double reverberation of being both sacred and profane. It was sacred because it distilled and preserved an ancestral connection, yet it still could resonate with the profane. And I mean profane like profanity. One scholar called profane space the place where eyes and ears must be closed. It was the place where body and soul had been defiled. So what was its secret? In many ways, and in many iterations, my work shows how it is what the pilgrims brought to the house that gave it back its life and its power. In Kirchhir, the house gave Sona some peace that she could live with. In Husinig, Barbara, by accepting its welcome and speaking its language, made her ancestral house a place that her soul and her memory could now inhabit. In Keri, standing where his house once was, Anushirvan activated the house's cosmic connection to the transcendent. And in Lige, Zavan gave the house back its music, its food, and some of his father's energy and joy. For everyone who once had a house in the homeland, these actions really are the pilgrim's embodied prayers, and the house always answers them. It couldn't heal the genocide, but it could give back to its children the lost embrace of its past. Thank you so much for this honor.
Okay, Carol. Oh, good. Yeah. Stop the screen share. Yeah, perfect. Okay. So thank you very much. And I would like to open that up to questions, comments, impressions. Martha, please unmute. Oh, unmute Martha.
Carol, I just have a quick message. When the Q&A is over, can you stay on with me? Because you're doing the recording, I need to get the recording from you. So we'll just hang in there at the end, okay?
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Happy
Thanks.
to do that.
Thanks.
Okay, who would like to ask a question?
Or share a memory.
Yeah.
Mm.
Carol, I have a question, which is, how did you get interested in or connected to the group of pilgrims?
That's a perfect question with a lot of answers. And actually, I talk about that in a couple of articles that are on my website. But I am a scholar of Ottoman and Turkish studies, and my field is architecture, the history of architecture, and my interest really is in how memory and places get stuck together. So that is how I work. And I traveled to Turkey to work on my dissertation in the 90s. Obviously, I was returning to school, and Hegnar was a classmate of mine. And while I was there, I realized that there was a lot I didn't know about Turkish history, because I started to see that as I was investigating Turkish houses and Turkish neighborhoods and asking people who lived in this house before, thinking I would find out something really interesting, like why they had redone the windows or the doors. They said, oh, an Armenian family, oh, an Armenian family, an Armenian family. Well, where were these Armenian families? So that is what started my interest in this. And then as I realized slowly and more that I really had a hole in my knowledge and wanted to learn more, this, with great good fortune, and that's another story, became the way that I could do it.
Okay, thank you. I think you have some people, we have some people here that went on the pilgrimage. Maybe Priscilla, if I paid attention at the right places. And Priscilla, what would anything you'd like to add, or what struck out to you about the trip with Carol?
So many things, and I'm so thankful to Carol for making it such a positive experience for me, because it was a very sad thing for me. But she was so warm and made me talk about it a little bit, and then it helped me a lot to be able to talk about it. And so I mean, I had some experiences there that she's got in the book. I saw a little bit that I have seen showed me. But one of the things that happened, and it wasn't even in that village, that I don't even know if I told you about this, Carol. The day before we went to my village, which was Huseinig, we were in this, well, maybe it was 2 days before, I don't remember. Horrible hotel that we didn't even stay. I forget the name of the town that we were in, but we got there and the place was really not good. And so Armin said, we're leaving here. I guess we did stay one night because the next morning I had washed my hair and there was no hair dryer or anything like that. And I was combing my hair and I'm looking in the mirror and said, Dad, tell me you're with me. I don't know if I can get through this or not. And anyways, so I'm combing my hair and I have curly hair. And my dad was the one that had the curly hair. Well, he had a wave right in the front of his hair before he got bald. And when I combed my hair, that wave came out. And I hadn't seen that wave in years because I always did it with a hairdryer. And so even when I didn't do it with the hairdryer, that never happened. But that day it did happen. And so I knew my dad was with me.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Priscilla, were you worried or were you concerned about traveling in Turkey?
Well, I never thought I'd ever get there. As a kid, I always wanted to go to the village and buy the land and put an Armenian church on it. And that was, and I knew that would never happen. And I never thought I'd ever get there. And then when the opportunity came up, I was amazed. And so it filled a hole in my own heart, really, to be able to be there and to be able to be in that village. We never found the actual house, but we were there. And I know that's where my father was born. I learned later that they had moved from there into the city because my father's father had he was a shoemaker and he had a shop there. And I guess that as they started to do well, they moved into that city. And I'm sorry that I never got to look in because I guess there was a residential area there that's probably where they moved to. But actually where my father was born was Houston. So we got there and another thing that's in the book happened that was really amazing. And I don't want to take up everybody's time with it, but it was quite an experience for me.
Okay, thanks for sharing that.
Uh-huh.
Who else? Questions?
I'm
Oh,
Lynn
Lynn, go-
Derderian, and I went with Carol, I believe on your last trip, right,
Yes,
Carol?
yes.
Yeah, I have to totally agree with what Priscilla said, everything that she said. Carol's warmth made it just a very special experience, but as one of the people who did not, I am from my family, on both my mother's family and my father's family are from Connecticut. And of course we went. And at the time that we went, it was a moment of great hope in Turkey. It was 2015. And there was a lot of hope for a more peaceful, more diverse representation in the government, et cetera. So it was a really amazing moment to be there. And the remarkable experience I had when I was there was that my cousin Peter Balakyan had a reading in Diyarbakir with a Kurdish poet. And it was such an amazing experience to be there because there was a very palpable embrace of the Kurdish people for us, saying to us, this is your home. We hope you will be here with us. It was a very, very moving experience. And I had an equally moving experience, which I didn't even witness. Carol witnessed another experience that I had when we went to Giragos. I was just totally unaware of what happened, and what she observed about my experience is sort of emblematic of her whole book. Her observations are so deep, sensitive, compassionate, and spiritual that I really did not I didn't even realize what was happening, but she did. But going to Subquiragos was very powerful because I am sure that that is where my grandmother was married. I am sure that is where my mother was baptized. I am sure of that. And when I went, I left pictures of my family under the carpet on the altar, thinking just above the cross, thinking that that would be a safe place to return them to, because they lost everything. And it was only a few months later, sadly, tragically, that that church was desecrated yet again. That picture, I'm sure, is gone. And it just sort of brought the whole, this wonderful embrace that we felt from Turkish people as well as the Kurdish people. But it just sort of brought all of that back home to me, that this sad history will not end until there is some kind of reconciliation. So I thank Carel from the bottom of my heart. I'm going to start crying now. For writing this amazing book and for shepherding. I don't know who else went on a pilgrimage, but shepherding us along with her.
Hold on a minute, guys.
That's a very, very powerful story, Lynn. I'm so touched by you putting those pictures underneath the carpet at the church.
Voice Iranian?
Thank you.
Someone has their mic on, if you don't mind shutting that.
It's Manu.
Oh, Manu, go ahead.
I have a quick question.
Rafi has had his hand up for a while.
Oh, I'm sorry. I missed it.
It's okay, Manu. You can go ahead. You can go ahead.
Thank you,
I can.
One of the things I was thinking about architecture was how to glance at a structure and say, by the size of the windows, that has to be an Armenian resident. But more importantly, in all that you've seen, I'm contemplating finding a spot that's an active village, so akin to the way it would have been years and years ago, centuries ago. And I did find such a village where everything that goes on there is, it's like going to colonial Williamsburg. Everything is the same. And they don't need nothing outside that village. They make the cheese, the butter, the lavash, the honey, everything is there. Is there such a place that you can say you stumbled across? And if not, isn't that quite an idea if we do find a place like that, so we could take children to say a week there, herding sheep and so on, in the form of a living museum? That's the operative expression. Thank you.
That's a really lovely and touching idea. And I hope the time would come in Turkey when it would be allowed. Of course, you couldn't really just move in and take over a village because they're inhabited mostly by Kurds in that area. But there are places that even Vakif in the one Armenian village that is left that could possibly do that.
I ran into such a village. There were Mushetsis. 30% have my blood. It took me almost until 2004, that far from the genocide.
Which
And
village?
It's called Zorashen. It's in the Gumri province
Oh, in Armenia.
in Armenia. And they just recreated what they had left in Mush.
Ah.
And it was destroyed in the earthquake. And because of the news today, it was fair to say that it was the Ukrainian people that rebuilt it just the way it was.
Oh, that's
Amazing.
interesting.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. I'd like to hear more about it. Thank you.
Well,
Thanks, Manu.
Martha put me in touch, but I have to kind of sign off because I'm in another meeting and I've got to stop this conflict.
Thank you
It was
for,
a
Okay.
terrific
Thanks,
program.
Manu.
Thank you, Camille. Thank you, Lynn.
Yep.
That's
Rafi,
welcome.
go ahead, please.
Carol, it's a two-part question. From the first year you partook in these trips to your last, have you noticed any difficulties? Has it been easier or harder to go politically or just in general? And the second part is, have there been, well, the Armenian cemeteries that you've run across, what are the conditions that you've seen when you were there in the villages or towns or cities, wherever you may have been, and if they even still exist?
They're kind of related questions in a way. The first time I went to Turkey was in 2007. And that was still a time when there had not been enough of a Kurdish opening, which would help the Armenian opening. So people were very, very tense about even acknowledging the Armenians existed. And we were told on the buses, even then, we're going through this difficult area, don't speak Armenian. Well, that was easy for me, but just, be quiet, and we don't want anyone to know. On the other hand, when we were in the villages away from cities, villagers knew. They were old enough, they had heard stories, they knew where the Armenian places had been, and many of them knew what had happened, but they were scared to say anything about it. And the reason that I say this is kind of related is because on one of my earlier trips in one of the villages, we wanted to go to, we knew that there was a cemetery there high up on the hill. And we said, well, how do we get there? Well, any of the kids could take us. Just say you want to go to the Armenian cemetery. Well, we went, and there were some stones left there, but there was no writing anywhere. And that was true in Husnig, in every place we went. The places, everything had been demolished. And part of that was the search for gold. So Armenian houses and Armenian cemeteries and Armenian churches, people had been told that the Armenians were extremely wealthy and that they had buried their gold. And so they would go in and destroy everything looking for it. And part of it was the anger that the state had told people to think about the Armenians and to demolish the cemeteries. So no, there's really nothing in the cemeteries left that gives information about anyone individually. I'd say Malatya, Malatya still has a cemetery that is intact, but it doesn't go very far back.
We have a question from, I don't know if it's Marianne or your, okay, go ahead. Just unmute your mic, just hit the red microphone. There you go.
All right. So actually, a year later, Armin went back to my ancestral home in Yozgat, and on the stoop was a tombstone with Armenian writing about Orhan Aslanyan, who was one of the founders of Yozgat. And it commended him as being founder and working with the Sultan and so forth. And it just is baffling to me why they would put a tombstone with Armenian writing in front of the house. I mean, it just doesn't make sense.
Well, hello, Mary. So glad to see you. And I'm so glad you brought this up, because I would have forgotten to say that a lot of the stones from the cemeteries were taken and broken up to be used as building stones. I don't think that's the case in your house, because it was.
No, it was intact. It was intact and right by the front door.
Yeah, now
Why
that's
would they do that?
a conundrum that I don't know whether they knew what they had or they thought it was a relic and gave age to the house.
I don't think so. There were other stones there with crosses on it. But not the extent of the writing that this had, recognizing him, Orhan Aslanyan, as the founder.
That's so amazing. And I wonder, would they have known? Did somebody know and then put that there? Because your house became an ethnographic museum. And as you know and have told me, it is not acknowledged as an Armenian house. And so when you go into this gorgeous mansion, all you know is that it is old and Ottoman. Marianne's family's history.
It is identified. One of the books that was published in Beirut has a whole chapter on it about Ohan Aslanyan, Shobaji Aslanyan, and the house. Of course, in the murals around the living room ceiling, there are lions, which is Arslan, the name of the family. So it was actually there. And it was sort of a weird discovery. Armin actually saw the stone, and we were traveling on our second trip without him at that time, and the phone rang, and the guide says to us, "I have a call for you." And I said, "Who the heck knows we're even here?" And it was Armin taking the picture and sending it to me. He was in Yozgat, we were still in Istanbul, but fascinating. But talk about pressure. This lady, when we came back from our first trip, we started telling people about the trips, and it was the misconceptions of our generation of what they heard, the stories from our parents and grandparents, what was frightening. You know, people would say, you know, do they have automobiles? Do they have, you know, subway systems and things like this? Because the stories they heard were from pre-1915. And I decided to make a presentation about our trip, and Carol decided to come out from California. Talk about pressure. This lady's coming to hear me speak on the subject, but it became an amazing experience because we ended up making that presentation. Yeah, there they are, making videos of them, and I made 25 of those presentations up and down the East Coast. And Priscilla and Paul were at several of them, and down in Florida and every place else. But we met so many people, and it was so meaningful to them for us to be able to say we were there. And as Priscilla knows and Carol knows, my wife dug up soil in every village we went to and filled up baggies. We had about 60 pounds of soil coming back, and she has, in the intervening 10 years, every time somebody's passed away someplace, we've gone to the family, given them a little vial of dirt to put in their parents' or grandparents' graves and that kind of thing, a little piece of the homeland. So that whole experience was just made the whole experience for me last longer. So.
Thank you.
I just want to say that to sum up these wonderful things that they're saying is the title of their journeys to historical Armenia, There Is Something There. And of course, it's not what there was, but there is an enormous amount. And that's I chronicle some of the feelings, and Marianne and Ed have chronicled some of the actual places.
Carol, this is such a personal story, and I'm just wondering, are you doing future trips, or are you done with that part?
Well, the trips are led by Armin.
Oh, that's right.
I was just a hanger-on, a lucky hanger-on, and he's now retired. And then COVID hit, so he has a protege that I hope will continue these trips. But it appears, I mean, and people will still be going back, and I'm sure you know people who would like to go back or have their children go back. But I feel like this is a generation that I'm in, that I'm part of too, that is in a time that's going to be over, because the people who go later will not have known personally the people who had and gotten the stories from the survivors who were there. That doesn't mean that their trips will be less meaningful or less powerful, but they will be very different. So trips may continue on, but what people want from them and what they get from them, of course, will be different.
Yeah. And
it will take some changes in Turkey, which is an ebb and flow with this.
Well, if there's no other questions, I think we will wrap up. We're a little bit over time. Thank you so much. I think it really was a very moving
Yes.
talk, and to hear the folks that were there and some of your what you added to it really really gave a very rich feel to tonight. So thank you so much, Carol. And I know you're going to stay on to check in with Martha. If you don't already follow us on Facebook or Instagram, please do so. And wherever you are in the country, you can connect with Zoom. So we'd love to see you again.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Really, thank you so much. Really
Thank you.
excellent.
Yes, thank you, Carol.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Hey, Carol, I didn't want to hold everybody up, but if I can just take 30 seconds to share something that you reminded me of. The map that you had, the map that you had drawn reminded me of this memory. I had forgotten about it. So we were visiting Sepastia, specifically Govdun, and I went with my dad in, I think, 93 or 4 after college.
Wow. Wow.
And that wasn't one of our villages. We were Lidja, Palu, Gooden, and 2 parents came from Lidja, actually. So those were the villages. But when we were in Govdun, I remember saying almost under my breath, God, Dad, everyone here looks like Uncle Barsam and Ani, my best friend Ani. And he said, that's because both of their parents are from here. Because everyone in Govdun, the skin was so it was darker than normal, and the hair was blacker than normal. It was almost dark like soot. My friend Ani and I would be at the beach in the summer, and she would get like soot. And I just thought that was so funny. He knew. I didn't know where their parents came from. He knew my best friend Ani's parents, and my Uncle Bassam wasn't really an uncle, but was one of his besties growing up. So anyways, I had forgotten about that little exchange until I saw the PowerPoint.
That's amazing. That's a wonderful story.
Yeah. So it was nice to see everybody. Nice to meet you, Carol.
Nice to meet you. Thank you for
Yeah.
coming.
Take care. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye,
Good
everyone.
night. Good
Amen.
night.
Leave.
I hate to see them go.
Yeah. Kind of the end, it sounds like at the end of a trip almost.
Yeah. I know.
It really is. It's reminding me of this when I came back from Hayastan. It's kind of like, oh, wait a minute now.
Yeah. You can understand how Zavin felt like, oh, the plane is going home. It's
Yeah.
over.
Definitely. I hope that his Armin Aroyan's protege starts these up again.
I think she will. I have to give her a call and see, but the last I talked to her, she wasn't, because, well, I wouldn't now.
Oh yeah, no, I think wait maybe another year.
Yeah. I mean, to go to the East, you can go to certain places, but really
Yeah, it's too risky right now.
it's risky. And then there's all of the refugees that are coming in. And so it's just,
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, they're coming into Hayastan too by the thousands.
yeah, bless them for taking them in.
Yeah. So you know what's gonna, I mean, have you had to save a Zoom recording
Yeah.
before?
Well, I'll stop it now.
Okay.